Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Angela. I am a full-time voiceover artist and audiobook narrator, and this channel right here is dedicated to those of you who are just starting out in this wonderful world of voiceover. And I like to share with you some of the techniques and some of the tricks and some of the other stuff that I have learned along my own journey into this industry of voiceover. So, I wanted to address today another question that I know that was really difficult to grasp for me when I was just starting out narrating audiobooks, and that is making sense of ACX's file standards. You know, what are the things that are needed to comply with ACX's requirements? Now, just starting out, if you don't even know what a DAW is or what RMS is or, you know, even a dB, all of this stuff is just like, it's like a completely foreign language and it makes absolutely no sense. So what I wanted to do today is kind of travel back in time and we're going to break down the ACX requirements for you. So I'm hoping that I can make them a little bit easier for you to understand, make some sense of them, and hopefully help you out with narrating your own audiobooks on ACX. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are on ACX's file submission requirements page. And on this page, it has all of their standards or requirements laid out for you. So we're going to go through each one and try to make I'm sorry, there's a gnat. I don't know how there was a gnat just flying around it. Sorry. I'll see if I can catch him. But here they break down all of the requirements that you need for your files to adhere to in order to be compliant with ACX's standards, in hopes that we can maybe make a little bit more sense of these. Because when I first started out, I didn't know. I was completely confused. Okay, so the first one we're going to go through is overall consistent in sound and formatting, which means they want all of the files to be somewhat similar, right? You're going to have some variances in like the loudness of each file, but each one should be fairly similar in tone, in pace, in loudness. They don't want anything that's too jarring from file to file. Because if you've ever listened to audiobooks yourself, as you listen from chapter to chapter to chapter, they want it to be, you want it to be uniform and easy on the ear. You don't want to have something that's, really easy to listen to the first chapter, and then the next chapter is someone talking really loud in a different tone of voice the whole time. You know what I mean? So this is basically what they want. They just want them to be all fairly similar in sound, so there's nothing abrupt or jarring to the listener. The next one down is include opening and closing credits. Now, these are going to be one file each, one file for the opening credits and one file for the closing credits. And ACX will show you, when you accept a book contract, what the opening and closing credits should, or how they should be read. They'll actually give you verbiage. But technically, the opening credits is the title of the book, the subtitle, the author's name, and the narrator's name. That's it. So, for instance, if I was narrating this book, The Great Gatsby, the opening credits would read, The Great Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, read for you, or narrated by Angela Oldfast. And that's it. The closing credits would be, and for the closing credits, you're going to need to know a little bit more information. You're going to need to know the copyright date, who owns the copyright, and you could also include production copyright, which would be the year that you narrate that production, that audiobook production. So, for example, for The Great Gatsby, the closing credits would be, This has been The Great Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, read for you or narrated by Angela Oldfast. And then we need to know the copyright, so I need to get out of here. Now, this book is in the public domain, but just for example purposes, if the publish date is the copyright date, I would say copyright 1925 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And then the production copyright would be production copyright 2021 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, if the book that you're narrating does not have a the end at the very last section that you're reading for the main section of the book, you want to include the end at the end of your closing credits. So the entire closing credits would be, again, "This has been The Great Gatsby." Written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Read for you by Angela Olfast. Copyright 1925 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Production copyright 2021 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The end. And then, of course, your opening and your closing credits would both have the appropriate room tone at the beginning and at the end, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then, of course, formatted to the specifications, but that's pretty much all that they are. Okay, so back to the submission requirements. The next one down is be comprised of all mono or all stereo files. Now, they do give you the option to record all and submit all of your files in either mono, which means one channel, or stereo, meaning two channels. You'll hear sounds from both the right and left side, whereas mono, it's the same, it's consistent out of the two speakers. Personally, I always submit all of my audiobooks in mono just so there's no differentiation between the two speakers. There's nothing that gets lost if you're listening with one earbud, that sort of thing. That's my ideology, but you can do it however you want. But I've always submitted my audiobooks in mono. I think it just sounds cleaner, but that's your call. The next one down is include a retail audio sample that is between 1 and 5 minutes long. The retail sample, if you've ever gone onto Audible yourself and you're shopping for a new audiobook to listen to, when you click on the sample, that's exactly what this is. It's just a snippet of the book to give the listener who's shopping for a book an idea of the narrator's tone, what the book may be about, that sort of things. It's the selling point. Other than the cover of the book, and of course, the writer or the author, it gives the shopper an idea of what they're going to be listening to. So the retail sample for me, I typically choose a section of an introduction, or of course it's up to the rights holder as well. If they don't care, if they want to leave it to your discretion to choose a section for the retail sample, that's fine. Personally, I like to choose a snippet of the introduction if it's long enough, because typically an introduction, if you think about it, is kind of a generalization of what the book's about and who the author is. And, it gives the listener a little bit, or the reader, a little bit of an idea of what the book is about. So I usually choose a section of the introduction to include as the retail sample. But it could be really anything. If there's a really great section of the book, with a lot of great dialogue or a really great point that's made, you can use that as well. But I don't want to give away too much to the reader or to the listener, the shopper. I don't want to give away surprises or secrets of the book in the retail sample. I want to give the shopper a reason to click that buy or download this button or download this book. You know what I mean? And the retail sample also, of course, needs to be formatted the same way as the rest of the book. It has to meet all of the same standards and formatting. So to make things easy, what I typically do is after I have the whole book done, the retail sample is the last thing that I do. It's my last step. After everything is done, edited, formatted, ready to go, I go back to the introduction, select a section, copy it to a new file, add the appropriate room tone at the head and the tail, and then save it as the retail sample because I already know that it's formatted properly. So that just makes things easy. So going down, each audio file must contain one chapter or section per file, meaning Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. Or if it's a smaller book and there are no chapters, but there are definitive sections, you could do that as well. You could separate each audio file as a section. Also keep in mind that each file cannot exceed 2 hours, 120 minutes. So you're kind of have to, if you have a book that doesn't have any definitive chapters or sections, you may need to work with the author a little bit about where to break up the sections of this book. I've never had that happen to me, but it could be a possibility. Now, if you have subsections through each chapter, don't separate those. If there are, in fact, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, keep them all together. If there are subsections within the chapters, keep them all within chapter 1. Keep them all within chapter 2. I hope that makes sense. As long as the chapter does not exceed the 2 hours, which I've never had happen, again, you'll be fine. So the next one down, have a running time no longer than 120 minutes, which we just discussed. Each audio file needs to be less than 120 minutes. And that does include the room tone, the half a second of room tone at the beginning and up to, the 1 to 5 seconds of room tone at the tail of the audio file. So 120 minutes total. Okay, scrolling down, we have room tone at the beginning and at the end, which we just talked about. But here we go, I'll just highlight this for you. Each file, at the beginning of each file, should be at least a half a second to a second of room tone. And at the end of each file should be at least a second to 5 seconds of room tone at the end. I typically use about 2.5 to 3.5 seconds of room tone at the end. But always, I start the section with somewhere between a half a second and a second. It's usually like 0.7 seconds is where the narration starts. Okay, back up here, and be free of extraneous sounds. And their definition of extraneous sounds would be mouth clicks, pops, you dropping something, the cat meowing, the dog next door barking, the lawnmower there's that gnat, the lawnmower next door, outtakes, mistakes, anything of that nature. All of that stuff needs to be removed. And then the next standard is measure between negative 23 dB and 18 dB RMS. And then also have a peak of negative 3 dB, that's as loud as it could possibly go at any point, and have a maximum noise floor of negative 60 dB. And we're going to hop into my Adobe Audition. I'm going to show you how to find this out. So here is my DAW. I use Adobe Audition. And what I'm going to show you, I'm just going to open a test audio file so I can show you the levels that we are talking about. So I'm going to go Shift Control N. I'm just going to create a new file. I'm just going to call this ACX test. Oops. Test. Okay, so now we're just going to record some stuff so I can show you what we're talking about here for ACX's standards. Okay, so what I want you to keep an eye on, down here, this bar is my volume level. This is going to show what the volume is of this particular track. So what we're looking for is for your finished audio to be between negative 23 and negative 18. Now, I know it's kind of backwards because obviously the larger the number, the louder or the more something is, right? But keep in mind this is negative, so this is kind of flipped on its head. The smaller the number, the smaller the negative number, the louder it is. So we're looking down here at my leveler, negative 23 and negative 18, with a max peak of negative 3. So as you can imagine, that's pretty loud. And that's usually when you're more animated or having you have a higher pitched tone. Like for instance, here on just me talking, that is probably the highest peak. And that is at negative 12 because it's not processed or anything. But keep an eye on this level bar as this plays. So as you can see, most of that stayed probably right over here in about negative 17. Let me just see. Okay, so I take that back. It was more like negative 14 is pretty much where it was. So once you process this, once you edit it and you have it all formatted, you know what? Let's just do that right now. I have a preset audiobook rack setting already saved in my Adobe Audition. And I do have a video on how to do this, and I'll link that card above. But I'm going to click Audiobook, and that brings up my presets for audiobook, and I'm going to apply them. And then I'm going to normalize to -3 dB. Now, to check my RMS, I go over here to Amplitude Statistics, and then I scan the selection. Now, what I want to look at is my total RMS amplitude. This file falls right at -20.65 dB. So I know that this loudness is acceptable for ACX's standards. And one thing I do want you to keep in mind if you check it this way is to make sure that your peak amplitude is -3 dB or lower. So -3 dB, 0.01, 0.12, anything that is quieter than -3, which it is. So we're fine. So this file will pass for ACX's standards. But the last thing that we need to check is for the noise floor. Now, remember when we spoke about the negative numbers, the smaller the number, the louder it is? So -60 dB is pretty quiet. In fact, it's over here on the other side of the spectrum. -60 dB is right where this dB is. This marker cannot move. So what we're going to do to test that is select my room tone over here, and we're going to play that. Now, as you can see, my level marker is not moving, so this will pass for the noise floor specification. Now, the last one is the actual file format. So it needs to be at 192 kilobytes per second or higher MP3, a constant bit rate of 44.1 or 44,100 kilohertz. So let me show you what that means. So back to our test file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Save As so I can see the configuration of the format of this particular file. And what we're going to look at is our sample type. Our sample type needs to be 44,100 and mono, which of course is your preference to go mono or stereo. Personally, I prefer mono. And then 16-bit is where we need to be. But we need to change the format of this file from WAV to MP3. Now, as soon as you hit MP3, your format settings down here are going to change to 192 kilobytes per second CBR, which is exactly what ACX wants. So your sample type is going to be, again, 44,100 Hertz, mono or stereo, 16-bit, MP3, 192 kilobytes per second CBR. And then we just OK to save. Now I'm just skimming through here again. I want to make sure that I touch on all of these things. So one thing that they did mention in here that I didn't mention, back to when we talked about your separate sections for each chapter, if there is a chapter title or a chapter or a section title, if there aren't chapters, at the beginning of the file, you want to say Chapter 1, Chapter 2. Or if there is no chapter titles, but there is a section title, you would say whatever the section, the header is, to indicate to the listener that this is a new chapter or the title of the file. And the last thing that I do want to mention, although I don't think this will be a problem, but ACX needs to have audiobooks narrated by a human. They will not take audiobooks that are narrated with any kind of AI software. It needs to be narrated by a human who can emote, who can express emotion, who can convey feelings, can convey, can have different character voices if needed. No AI software is allowed to narrate books for ACX. At all. They will not take it. It will be removed. All right, guys, that was a breakdown of ACX's standards and requirements for audiobooks. I hope that helped. If you have any additional questions or comments, please leave them down below or send me an email. I always love hearing from you guys. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and subscribe because why not? Thank you so much again for your time, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.